Welcome. In this deep dive, we're exploring a potential link between eating citrus fruits and, well, a lower chance of experiencing depression.
And crucially, we'll be looking at how the gut microbiome, that's the community of microbes inside you, might be playing a key role here.
It offers a pretty fascinating new perspective on the connection between diet and mental health.
Our main source for this is a recent 2024 study published in the journal Microbiome. It's by Samath Pongtorn and colleagues.
They analyzed a lot of data, long-term dietary habits, and depression diagnoses from a large group of women over 14 years.
And they didn't stop there. They also performed detailed microbiome and metabolomic analysis on a smaller subset of these women.
Plus, they validated some key findings in a separate cohort, this time involving men. So, quite comprehensive.
Absolutely. Let's start with that initial link they found between citrus and depression.
So what was the headline finding from that large group of women?
Well, the core result from looking at over 32,000 women over that 14-year follow-up was pretty striking. Higher citrus intake was associated with a 22% lower risk of depression.
22%. And did they account for other factors that might influence depression risk?
They did. This association remains significant, even after adjusting for various lifestyle factors, things like BMI, physical activity levels, smoking status, overall diet quality, and even existing health problems or comorbidities.
So the link seems fairly robust, at least in this population.
It does. And interestingly, it seemed quite specific to citrus fruits.
Meaning other fruits didn't show the same connection.
Correct. They didn't find significant links between depression risk and total fruit intake overall or total vegetable intake.
Not even specific popular fruits like apples or bananas.
No. Based on this data, apples and bananas weren't significantly associated with lower depression risk either. It really pointed towards citrus.
Did they look within citrus, like specific components?
Yes. They drilled down a bit further. They looked at certain flavonoids, which are compounds found in citrus, particularly in the peels and juice. They found that higher intake of two specific flavonoids, naringenin and formininettin, were each individually linked with a lower risk of depression.
Naringenin and formininettin, what about vitamin C?
Citrus is famous for that.
That's what you might expect. But interestingly, vitamin C intake itself was not significantly associated with depression risk in this study.
So it's potentially these other compounds, the flavonoids, doing the heavy lifting, not necessarily the vitamin C.
It seems that way based on these findings, which naturally leads to the question of how this might be working.
Which I assume brings us to the gut microbiome part of the study.
Precisely. To investigate the underlying mechanisms, they conducted that more detailed sub-study involving 207 of the women.
And they analyzed stool samples from these women.
Yes, to get a picture of their gut microbial communities.
What did they find there in relation to citrus? They found that higher citrus intake was associated with changes in the relative abundance of 15 specific gut microbial species.
15 different types of bacteria affected by citrus consumption. Was there one that stood out?
There was. One species in particular, Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, often called F. prausnitzii, for short, showed a notable connection.
How so?
Its abundance was found to be higher in the individuals who reported higher citrus intake.
More citrus, more F. prausnitzii. What about the link to depression in this smaller group?
Conversely, the women within this substudy who had depression were found to have a lower abundance of F. prausnitzii.
So higher citrus correlates with more F. prausnitzii, and lower F. prausnitzii correlates with depression.
That's the pattern they observed. And they went further to validate this F. prausnitzii depression link.
That was in the separate group of men you mentioned earlier.
Yes, in that independent male cohort. They confirmed the association lower F. prausnitzii was linked with depression.
Did they find anything else in the male cohort related to F. prausnitzii?
They did. Higher abundance of F. prausnitzii in the men was associated with a higher composite biomarker score related to serotonin and GABA.
Those are key neurotransmitters often implicated in mood regulation and depression.
Exactly. So this suggests F. prausnitzii might be linked not just to depression status, but potentially to the levels of relevant neurochemicals. Think of F. prausnitzii as a sort of beneficial resident, potentially.
Okay, so we have citrus linked to lower depression, citrus linked to higher F. prausnitzii, and lower F. prausnitzii linked to depression, and possibly altered neurotransmitter markers. How might F. prausnitzii actually be exerting this effect?
That's the next logical step. They investigated the mechanisms. How could this bacterium influence things? They looked at its metabolic activity,
What it produces,
what
essentially.
it produces, and the process it carries out. They focus on a specific metabolic pathway produced by F. prausnitzii, known as the S-adenosyl L-methionine cycle I pathway, or SAM cycle I for short.
The SAM cycle I pathway, what did they find regarding this pathway in depression?
They found that participants with depression had a lower abundance of this SAM cycle I pathway, encoded in their gut microbiome overall.
Lower levels of the pathway itself in those with depression. Did they look at specific components within that pathway?
They did. They identified key enzymes, think of them as the machinery within the pathway, like adenosylhomocysteine nucleosidase, S-ribulopyrohomocysteine lyase, and crucially, S-adenosylmethionine synthetase.
In these enzymes.
Their abundance was also lower in the individuals diagnosed with depression.
So the whole production line, the SAM cycle pathway, and its key components seem less active or abundant in depression.
That's what the data suggests. It's like a potentially important metabolic function related to this bacterium is reduced.
And could they connect this pathway back to the citrus intake?
Yes, they managed to tie together. They looked specifically at how citrus intake and its micronutrients might relate to this SAM cycle I pathway within F. prausnitzii.
Focusing on the flavonoid naringin again.
Naringin specifically, yes, along with overall citrus intake. They found that higher citrus intake, and particularly higher naringin intake, was associated with an increased abundance of the gene encoding S-adenosylmethionine synthase within F. prausnitzii.
So eating citrus, especially getting naringin, seems to boost the genetic instructions for making a key enzyme in this SAM cycle.
It appears so. S-adenosylmethionine synthase is actually the rate-limiting enzyme in producing SAM, the main product of this cycle within F. prausnitzii.
Rate limiting meaning it controls the overall speed of the production line.
Correct. So boosting this could potentially increase the output of SAM by this specific bacterium.
Which suggests a direct line. Eat citrus, get naringin in, potentially boost F. prausnitzii's ability to make SAM.
That's the potential mechanism unfolding. It links the dietary component directly to a specific metabolic function in a key gut microbe.
Now, how does this SAM cycle activity relate back to the neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine?
The researchers then explored that connection. How might this SAM cycle activity influence neurotransmitter regulation, possibly through the gut-brain axis?
What did they uncover there?
They found an association between the abundance of the SAM cycle I pathway, considering both F. prausnitzii and all microbial species capable of it, and the expression of a specific gene in the colon.
Which gene?
The gene for monoamine oxidase A, or MAOA.
MAOA, what does that do?
MAOA is an enzyme involved in the breakdown, the degradation, of monoamine neurotransmitters. This includes serotonin and dopamine.
So it cleans them up, reduces their levels.
Essentially, yes. And the finding was that a greater abundance of the SAM cycle I pathway was associated with lower expression of the MAOA gene in the colon tissue samples they analyzed.
Lower MAOA expression, meaning the enzyme that breaks down serotonin and dopamine might be less active?
That's the implication. If MAOA gene expression is lower, you might expect less MAOA enzyme activity.
Which could lead to what?
It could potentially lead to greater availability of serotonin and dopamine in the gut, as they aren't being broken down as quickly.
And that provides a plausible mechanism connecting everything back.
It does. It suggests that F. prausnitzii, potentially stimulated by citrus components like naringin, produces SAM via its SAM cycle I pathway. This pathway's activity might then downregulate MAOA expression in the gut lining,
Leading to potentially higher local levels of neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine.
which, through the complex communication of the gut-brain axis, could plausibly influence mood and contribute to the lower risk of depression observed with higher citrus intake.
So let's try to summarize the key takeaways from this deep dive.
Well, the research indicates a link between consuming citrus fruits and a lower risk of developing depression, at least in the population studied.
And this association appears potentially mediated by the gut microbiome.
Specifically, the bacterium Faecalibacterium prausnitzii seems important. Higher citrus intake was linked to more F. prausnitzii.
And F. prausnitzii's metabolic activity, particularly its SAM cycle I pathway, might be the crucial link.
That pathway's activity seems connected to the regulation of MAOA, an enzyme that breaks down neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine in the gut.
So the chain could be citrus nenus F. prausnitzii, SAM cycle drift, potentially less neurotransmitter breakdown, influencing mood via gut-brain axis.
That's the proposed mechanism, yes. It's quite an intricate biological pathway they've mapped out.
No, it's crucial to add the usual caveats, isn't it?
Absolutely. While this study presents strong evidence and a very plausible biological explanation, it is still primarily observational.
Meaning it shows associations, correlations, but doesn't definitively prove cause and effect. We can't say for certain citrus prevents depression based only on this.
Correct. Further research is definitely needed. Intervention studies, for example, would be valuable to confirm causality.
And also studies in more diverse populations to see if these findings hold true across different groups of people.
That's always important. Replication and extension are key in science.
But it certainly highlights the really complex and fascinating interplay between what we eat, the microbes living in our gut, and our mental well-being.
It really does. The gut-brain axis is clearly a very active area of research with potentially significant implications.
So considering this intricate connection that we've explored today between diet, the gut microbiome, and mental state, perhaps a closing thought for you, the listener.
In what ways might you personally consider or explore the relationship between your own dietary choices and how you feel day to day?